Welcome everybody to this session titled Recording with a Critical Ear. This is probably one of the most pragmatic sessions that we'll be providing over these 11 sessions together. And it's really applicable to our amazing students at the conservatory here in Kansas City that are consistently recording for auditions and applications and summer festivals and all kinds of other situations that arise that need a recording. So you have three very special world-renowned guests with you today that I admire, and these are three of my very best friends on the planet, and I love them all. And I'm going to send this over to Joe. He's going to tell you a little bit more about them.
Well, first of all, thanks to the three of you for joining us today. And I'll do a quick hello for the students and anyone else watching. They have your bios, but just so they can put a name to a face if they don't necessarily know some of the people joining us. So we have our chief recording engineer for the conservatory, also an alum, and with me, we've done several projects together where I've been a producer and a performer, same with Professor Davis. This Bob Beck, would you say hi to everybody? We're delighted to have you.
Hey everybody, great to be here.
And Zach Sheeman, who I first met in China when we were performing over there. He was with the Prism Quartet just when he was about to become a faculty member with the conservatory, world-renowned saxophonist, alto sax player with the Prism Quartet, and a great colleague and triathlete, Professor Sheeman.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in.
And this young lad, Bobby Watson's been around a little bit. He's recorded a couple of albums and produced some and written some music and kind of worn a million artistic hats. And he's also a recent retiree and wearing a Chiefs hat. Yes, sir. A recent retiree that couldn't leave. We pulled him right back in because we needed more of Bobby Watson at the conservatory. So ladies and gentlemen, please say hey to Bobby Watson.
How y'all doing, folks?
We are delighted to have you. And what is about to transpire over the next hour is we have over 120 plus students enrolled in our conservatory band's COVID experiences this semester. And as a result, we've been able to put together these 11 panels. They've all submitted questions. We've encapsulated the themes from those questions into several that we will share with you today and ask for your input. So how do we, this one's for you, Bob Beck, first. We'll start there. How does one decide where they want to record? I mean, are there things we should consider?
Well, I mean, yeah, sure. Apart from the obvious things like, if you need a piano, does the space have a piano? I think the acoustics are really, really, really key, and I mean, not just the acoustics in terms of how they make your instrument or your ensemble sound, but what's the environmental noise situation like? I mean, noise is a real killer for recordings, especially with acoustic music that tends to not really be loud enough to cover up noise. And, obviously a wind band going full bore will cover up any environmental noise. But then at some point in the piece, things are gonna quiet down, and you're gonna start to hear traffic or heating and cooling systems or buzzy lights or things like that. And it is, I mean, we've got really powerful noise reduction software available to us now, but honestly, it's just not good enough to really tackle major noise problems without hearing audible effects from it. So I think that's really important. You want a space that flatters your instrument or your band, but you've got to think about noise. And a lot of our students, when they perform recitals in churches around town, they think of the first but not the second of those two things. Mm-hmm. And so, just as an example, students, if you were planning to play a recital at Trinity Lutheran Church, we'd just much rather you didn't. You're going to be a lot happier with your recording if you find a quieter space. It's right on Shawnee Mission Parkway. It has really actually bad acoustics for recording, although it's not so bad when you sit there as a listener. But the noise is just, we can't do anything about it.
For Bobby, like with all the albums you've done, what about for you finding a space to record? Does that matter, or is it more the person?
If it's a big band, I would like a large room, large enough with a high enough ceiling, and the room size is very important. With a combo, sight lines are important, and the isolation. You know, the sight lines between the drum, the piano, and the bass, so everybody can see each other and still have enough separation. That's very important when I choose a place. I've had places where the control booth is on another floor, and we're communicating by camera, you know, and the band's on the third floor and the control booth is on the fourth floor, you know. I think, Bob, we did something like that with the big band when we did the Up to Date.
Yeah, I think we had the band in 326, and the control room was up on the 5th floor. So yeah, I mean it's not ideal, and I don't think we even ran video for that, did we? I think we just had audio communication.
No.
So it's
Yeah, just audio.
It's really difficult, and you know, in a situation like that, I rely almost completely on you as the ensemble director to, you know, tell me when we have a good take and we're ready to move on. You know, that's it's it, it it's more difficult when you're sort of physically disconnected like that to really be in touch with the process. I don't think the results end up as good.
Thank you. That's actually helpful advice as we start to think of areas. Zach, do you have anything to offer to that?
Well, I think Bob really nailed it with like the acoustics of the hall or the space or the recording studio, and then the extraneous noise. I mean, I just realized as we were recording this, an ambulance went by.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like, you'll go to a space to kind of scope it out. Maybe you go to a church to see what the acoustics are like. You're like, yeah, this is great. It's quiet. And then you come back on Monday morning and there's like traffic going by.
Yeah, time of day.
Somebody's working on the elevator. Those things can just like completely ruin a recording session because you have a certain amount of time blocked off, and then you have to wait for 2 hours for the storm to pass, or for traffic to slow down, or for construction to slow down. We've had actually cases where we had to like take a complete day off because a construction project was going on, and we didn't realize it because we recorded all day Saturday, Sunday. Then we go in to finish on Monday, and construction workers are back, and we have to wait until like 6 p.m. to start recording.
Yeah, I remember recording during a sleet storm, and we had to bail, all of us. It was like, that was it. Money gone.
Hey, Bob, pragmatically for our students, can you list your first of all, students, I don't know how many recordings Bob Beck has been in charge of, but it's in the thousands by now. And instead of let's going through the list of the bad places, let's do the 5 best places in town that you think there are to record. Can you
I was afraid you were going to ask that because it's really tricky. There are very few ideal recording spaces in town, including the Kauffman Center. It's not
a disaster.
It's there are good seats in the house for an audience experience, but it doesn't record very well. At least I haven't done my best work there, and I've tried. So it's tricky. So the best hall, you know, is not always the best hall for recording. Honestly, well, I'm a little biased. I'm very used to Whitehall, and I like recording most things in Whitehall. I wouldn't want to do a jazz project in Whitehall. It's too reverberant. The drum set sounds boomy, the bass sounds boomy, and there's not much we can do to clean that up. In terms of recital spaces, you know, if a student can't get time in Whitehall, there are a few churches pretty close to town. I think a lot of students know Central United Methodist, which is you know, a block away. That's a pretty good space acoustically, and it's between Oak and Brookside Road, and both of those can have a fair amount of traffic, but it tends not to make it into the church as much as a lot of other places. The fact is, most churches, you know, they sort of have the musical acoustics that you want to play in, but churches are not ever designed with keeping outside sound out in mind. That's just not a thing that, you know, church designers ever consider. So you know, the beautiful stained glass windows, they leak air, and that means they leak sound, and all of that gets into the recording. So there's just not, I don't have a good answer.
So can I jump in for a second just to see if this was from earlier, Bobby? I want to go back. You said I know we're a little off, but you guys are bringing on so many good aspects. Bobby, give us like if you were to give someone a model of a recording that you like the sound for in a combo, what would it be? Like, is it an era or is it an actual record?
That's interesting. I would say by and large, um, I like Rudy Van Gelder's recordings from Blue Note, his Blue Note recordings. Uh, that's
Why?
basically where I would start.
Why, Bobby? What's the component to that makes it?
You can hear every instrument and the separation, the the audio image that when you close your eyes and listen, you can place the instruments. It's how he's got the instruments placed in the mix, and you can especially hear it on vinyl. I know that these days it's those are hard to get in front of those type of speakers where you're listening to a vinyl, and the sound stands up, so it feels like you're standing right in front of the band.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like the CTI recordings that were produced by Creed Taylor, but again, it was the same engineer, Woody Van Gelder. You know, he's kind of the model that we use, and I think that most engineers that do a lot of jazz recordings start there and tweak it. I don't like dry recordings so much. You know, I just I just feel that when you make a recording, it's got to have it should be a documentation, and at the same time, ear candy. So it's got to sound a little pleasing to non-musicians because you have listeners who are fans of your music. So you want to put a little sugar on it, little frosting on it, and that comes in the sound. Because we're still competing with the sound of commercial, quote unquote, commercial recordings. So you want to have a taste of that feeling, so that I don't want to hear the sound of the room. I want the music to be embedded in a environment where you can't tell if it's a small room or a big room or whatever, or your closet. So I like it to be anonymous when you hear that you don't know.
Cool. That's interesting. Let's move on to the next question. I do want to make an aside so the Kauffman Center folks don't take issue with us. That hall is one of the best halls I've ever been in on the planet. FYI, it's just the floor is hollow underneath. That sounds. It's difficult. It's everything Bob said is true from a recording standpoint, but for live music, I don't know if you're going to find much better. Just as an FYI.
Yeah, I just wonder if I might add just the difference between recording in like a true studio space versus a hall, and the advantages of one versus the other. I think like when we're doing maybe unaccompanied stuff or stuff with electronics, it can be really helpful to have playback and also just have a really dry space for post-production versus if you're doing something that you want like the sound of a cathedral or a church. You can't really replicate that in a studio with artificial reverb. So that's often a consideration, especially when I'm recommending for students. They're looking for a space. Like, do you want the sound of a church? Do you want the sound of the Kauffman Center? Or actually for this recording, would you prefer to have the cleanliness of a dry studio where you have a lot more control afterwards?
Awesome. What aspects of the recording process do you find most difficult? Zach, we'll start with you.
Honestly, I think just maintaining a constant level of energy throughout the session and maintaining the motivation, like especially when you're recording with other musicians. So to get the stars to align and every musician in the booth or every musician in the studio or the hall to have their best take at the same time, it just doesn't happen. And so you learn working with other musicians how to just be consistent and not feel like, okay, that was my best take. I'll never be able to play it that well ever again. Knowing that, well, I can play it again, and each take's going to be a little bit different, And really what you're going for is the best composite, and kind of setting your ego aside and letting go of, well, that was my best take, but the group maybe sounded better on this other take that wasn't perfect in my, alto saxophone little thing. But that doesn't matter so much. And so that can be frustrating on a personal level when you feel like, well, I've nailed it the last 3 times, and then this one time was great for the group, but it was the first time I missed it. And you get to know some musicians get better and better with each take, and other musicians are stronger at the beginning and then they kind of fade. And so what I try to do is just try to be consistent every time, and I make a mistake and I keep going, and try not to judge that mistake, and I just like try to have a good remainder of that take and keep going. But the other challenge is just maintaining not just my own personal mood and energy levels, but like trying to maintain that with the ensemble you're recording with. And a big part of that is making sure that you're well rested, and you're well fed, and that you're all kind of on the same page with like, okay, we're going to break at this time and have lunch at this time, so that we're all kind of in a good mood together. But then things come up and something takes longer than you thought it would, and it throws off the schedule. And so just having flexibility is key. It's really challenging though.
Zach, Bobby or Bobby? Robert or Bobby?
I have to agree with Zach. That's the hardest part, is staying consistent. And like I mentioned earlier, you play something and then you have to let that go and forget it, and say, well, I'll just do it again, and just I mean, Zach nailed it. I mean, 'cause some people get better as we go along, and some people it's better in the beginning and they fade. And so that's the tricky part, like you said, maintaining your energy, and don't stop if you make a mistake. That's very important.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a very rookie mistake. Yeah, when young musicians go into the studio, they'll make a mistake and they'll stop, and don't stop, because like mix sessions are fix sessions,
That's good.
Great, yeah, it's
I
great.
like that.
Robert?
Well, I mean, in terms of my challenges, communication is one of the big ones. I work with students a lot, and a lot of students, they maybe have never recorded before. They don't speak the language, and so finding a level that I can communicate with them on is pretty important. And just like to kind of bring it back to something Bobby mentioned earlier, Bobby, you mentioned that you don't want to hear the room on a recording. You'd rather hear, just whatever artificial acoustic you decide to add to the recording after the fact, which is fine and valid, but an engineer and producer would need to know that up front, so they choose the right mics and put them in the right places to minimize the amount of room that gets picked up. So, I'll have students schedule a recording session in the studio, and I'll say, "What are we recording?" And they'll say piano, and that doesn't answer the question, because are we recording jazz piano, or is it baroque, or is it romantic, or is it rock and roll? I mean, I'm going to mic the piano differently for all those things, and I'm going to choose different effects to add to the piano sound, different reverbs, depending on the context that you want me to create for you as a player. So just communicating what it is. Like, everybody needs to know what the destination is, and what route we're going to take to get there. I feel like that's the best way for everybody to walk away happy.
I want to piggyback on this as a conductor's viewpoint. It's in the most difficult thing for me when I get in settings, especially if we get 40, 50 people on stage. And everyone's alluding to this, but the psychology of this is where I spend my whole day. And it's in certain ways, recording are the easiest days for me, because I'm in the middle of it, and I can't hear everything, and there's 15 microphones, and I have to have people behind me that are specifically listening to woodwind, specifically listening to brass, specifically listening to percussion, and they're listening for such specificity when they're back there. There's no way when I'm writing the massive sound that I'm going to be able to pick all that up. So I don't even deal with it. I just start and stop essentially in real time. But what I do deal with, and it's all day, is if we're in the fourth take of something and I see a person that's about to cave, I have gotten really good at learning when and how to move on to the next thing. It's very subjective, and you're never going to hit it exactly right. But I'm watching the clock. I got to figure this out. I've got 50 people here, and that's stressful. I can tell you. And I leave those days. I don't want the students to ever see it. It's usually conversations between Bob and I on the phone or whatever. They're not hearing the real conversation that the third kazoo, just completely missed this, and now I've got to figure out a way to share this so that person doesn't feel more pressure and then play it worse the next 4 times, and then we never get a good take. And the one last thing on Zach's point that I will mention, and it's to me it's spot on. So if we're recording a 17-minute piece and we get in the weeds on this one measure or one note, when you go back and listen to the whole 17 minutes, no one's going to, I mean, you might hear it for a millisecond, but no one's listening as specific as we are when we're doing this editing. And I just had to say, okay. And I listened to something like, I have a whole phrase that I didn't really end up liking after I got all the takes back. But then when I listened to it in the context of 17 minutes, it's fine. I mean, it really is fine. No one's going to hear it. And it doesn't take away from the excellence of the recording. It just makes it real life and human beings doing it. So those are the things I wanted to add. But the psychology, having your head in the right space, knowing that you're going to miss some things, knowing that you're going to make some things, as we all have to face failure sometimes. We all have to face success sometimes. Sometimes what you think is good, they're not going to think is good when they're listening with the headphones on. That's also frustrating for people. So those are some things that make it really difficult. And it is an art, not a science. So it's actually both.
Listening to you all and reflecting on the several recording projects I've had the opportunity to be a part of, all of this resonates with me. And I'll give you, with Fountain City, we've done 4 or 5 recordings, and we've had different producers, and it's a different sound. And the only thing I can tell you is one I had was sounded like a military band recording, which wasn't authentic to the what we were doing. And the others, because I found what Bobby said, bring in a demo of what you want. And then I found a person I trusted. That was the biggest breakthrough I had. So Bobby, you have done, actually I remember one of my favorite albums was Ryan Kaiser. You were the producer on. Now I know you have produced, and I also know that you have hired producers. So what do you do when it's time to, like, I'm going to make a record, I want you to produce it, or I'm going to self-produce it because I've done it enough? When do you that's a big thing to unpack, but maybe it's simple. I mean, what can you tell our students? Produce, here's what you need, here's who you need, or you can do it yourself. And everyone else can piggyback on this because you've all had experience on that.
Well, I think the relationship between the artist and the producer should kind of be organic, because it's not pop music, like if you have Gladys Knight, but I imagine they pick their producers. I think there should be a personal relationship between someone that you want to produce, because the producer is really an extra set of ears and also sort of a referee. You call a strike or a ball, and the players have to accept that trust in his judgment. So the producers that I've always had, I have a personal relationship with, and I trust them. And sometimes they basically give me an opportunity to make judgments myself. Like Steve was saying, nobody's going to hear something that goes by in a quick moment, because Duke Ellington stuff, some of the stuff that are considered masterpieces, when I get in there and start, when I was transcribing some, I was hearing all kind of quote unquote mistakes, and sometimes mistakes get transcribed, and then they live on forever, but that might not have been the real note. So that's very important to, like you say, take some, leave some. Perfection is out of our hands in terms of that type of goal. And but back to the producer. I think we need to have a personal relationship with somebody that, and sometimes I always have an extra set of ears. Sometimes it's Pam, my wife Pam. Sometimes it's Pam and the kids. They're in the studio, and they're like my producers. You know, so it's like the producer is just sort of an extra set of ears, and you know.
Zach?
Yeah, I think it'd be good for the students just to try to define what the role of a producer is, depending on the recording. So a lot of the recordings that I do with Prism, we self-produce, meaning it's just us and an engineer, and that's really just oftentimes to save money. Like we'd always rather have a producer if that's an option, but we don't necessarily have it in the budget to hire a producer. And as a result, our recording sessions end up running longer because we're not sure if we have something. And so that's really the luxury of having one or multiple producers. Like when you've done wind band recordings, you'll have essentially five producers or more in the booth listening to different things so that you don't have one person trying to listen to everything at once. But with a solo recording, I mean, like Bobby said, it could be a friend or somebody who you trust. I think that's the big thing. Like somebody who knows you're playing really well, somebody who has good ears and can identify exactly like what it is you're listening for, what you might consider to be a mistake or something you'd want to do again. Somebody who you trust their judgment, of course. Somebody who can be honest with you without it becoming personal. So,
Right.
like if you could have your teacher be your producer, that can work really well because you're used to getting critical feedback from your teacher. Or in a session that we did, I had a student who I trusted really closely to be kind of my own personal producer because that student knows exactly the types of things that I'd be listening for. You just have to be careful about who it is that you ask to do that. I'm not sure that you would want to necessarily go with your significant other, depending on your relationship with that person, because you don't.
Cam's a musician,
Right.
Musician of the highest order, so different.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Zach, you make a really good point. I mean, ultimately, I think somebody that knows what you're capable of, somebody knows what you sound like, and how well you can play the rep is a good person to stick in that role because if somebody, like just as an example, if you have somebody that doesn't really know you're playing and they're pushing you to get a better take on something that you've already played your best take 20 takes ago, that's not helpful. That's counterproductive. And so, producers can create problems too if they're not the right person for the job. So it is important.
Yeah, I wanted to say that for Mike, the word producer is very loose. I know me and Bob Beck have been in the studio doing some things, and I'll ask Bob. And at that point, he puts on his hat. And he's my producer for me.
Yeah, and yeah, I was just gonna say, but the work that I do, I work with I am primarily an engineer, but I produce almost everything I record also because there's not a producer per se. So I've learned to kind of wear both hats at the same time, and it's really very different. An engineer should really be focusing mostly on technical things and less on artistic things. But in the lines of work that I'm in, that's just not really on the table. I have to have both of those hats on at all times.
Yeah, and the producer really takes on more significance when you're dealing with pop music and you're dealing with an artist who doesn't write music, like a Lou Rawls or, like I said, Gladys Knight or some of the divas out there. They, I mean diva, I mean in a great way. They just have a great voice. And so the producer picks the material, lets the artist listen to it. He picks the arranger. He decides the concept. I mean, that's the producer. But basically, at my level, I'm sure Zach's level, we're basically always self-producing. I've self-produced everything, and and there's always been an extra set of ears in the booth. Sometime it was Michael Cascona. When I was at Columbia, nobody ever came to my session, but George Butler got credit for being the producer on all my records, but he never came to none of my record dates. So I was producing it, quote unquote, producing it myself. So at that point, since we were on that kind of level, I insisted on me being the producer and George Butler or Michael Cascuna being the executive producer, because they're the ones that wrote the checks and ordered, and paid the studio. But in terms of the producer, I felt like I did that, and I had my boys in the booth or my family in the booth. So this word producer it's pretty elastic. I don't think that's the most important thing to worry about when you go into the studio as a producer. I think it's the last thing you should worry about.
You might have already been answering this, but the specific questions, and we're going to go to Bob Beck on this first. What are some of the common mistakes in the recording process that you would love every student to know, or every person to know?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've already covered a lot of it. Definitely preparation is key. I mean, I've literally spent 4 hours recording a 5-minute piece of music with people that were rehearsing in the studio, and it's aggravating. So that's obviously a really big one. But more for students, more and more you see students that are recording their own stuff. They'll buy a handheld recorder or get a little audio interface and a few mics for their computer, which is great. We encourage that. We have a sequence of classes here at the conservatory if people want to study how to do that well. But what happens more often than not is somebody just buys the equipment and then they think they're an engineer. So I mean, the things that I really think are important are mic placement, number one. And I can't tell you right now where to place your mic. It depends on the instrument and it depends on the context. But generally, people are putting mics too far away, in my experience. The space you record in, again, we've already touched on it, but that's very important. Those two things are basically more important than anything else as far as actually the most important thing is you and your instrument. If you sound good on your instrument, you can use any mic and it's going to sound good, and you can place it anywhere and it'll be usable. But yeah, placement, space, recording levels. You got to make sure and adjust it so that you don't have your level set too high and you get distortion on the recording. If you set it too low, you're gonna have to amplify it in software, and you're gonna hear more background noise. So I mean, just from a technical standpoint, the levels are really important. So I will say to anybody that has or is going to buy a little equipment and start recording themselves, just ask a professional for a little bit of advice. It's free. It's easy for us. We talk about audio all day, every day, and we're happy to help out with that stuff and make sure that you start your project on the right foot, because there's not much to be done to clean something up if it wasn't recorded right in the first place.
Bobby or Zach, anything you want to add? Can you think of anything?
I just want to say, for the performer, one of the mistakes that they make is they get off mic, because sometimes when you're playing live, a trumpet player might want to, when he's going up, the horn might go down when he plays high, or go up when he does this. If you can control your body in the studio and still get the same nuances out of your instrument, I think body control is that's the main thing, is that students go off mic, they close their eyes, or they're looking at the music so intently, then they're way off mic, So control, if you can control your body.
Yeah, and that applies to situations like the way Bobby records in the studio, where every instrument has a mic or two on it. If you're recording in a concert hall or a room where you're miking the room rather than the instrument, which is what we tend to do on the classical side of things, that's a thing that you don't have to worry about. But definitely, if you're putting mics close to your instrument, literally an inch can make a pretty audible difference. So not moving around is important. And Zach, you move around when you play some. So we can't put the mics maybe, quite as close as we'd like to get the level of detail that we might be after. I'm not calling you out. I'm just saying that that's the thing that you do, and pretty much every sax player I've ever recorded, and every trumpet player I've ever recorded that I've put a mic on, they move when they play. That's part of it.
I think that's a bigger issue depending on how directional the instrument is. So I think it's a bigger issue for a trumpet than like a tenor saxophone. Bigger issue for a soprano saxophone even than a tenor saxophone, where you just move 45 degrees and it completely changes the sound or the dynamic that the mics are picking up.
Yeah,
miking.
Something that we haven't mentioned, at least I know in our large ensemble sessions, if I don't spend the hours, and it's literally hours, thinking about the session before the session, like, okay, we're going to do A to C, then we're going to do 4 before C, and then we're going to go to G, and then we're going to do 4 before G, and then we're going to go to K, the rehearsal K, rehearsal G, rehearsal A. There's more that goes into that than just that. I just can't map the piece out. And this happened with us in the Bayen that we recorded of Chen Yi, Zach, with Prism Saxophone Quartet actually here. The trumpet part is insanely difficult. How it just sits high, like over and over and over on high C's. And no, I don't know any trumpet player that can do that for 4 hours. They're going to have a break. So I might do 30 measures in the third movement and have to go back to the first movement and go back and forth and vice versa. But you have to really think about the abilities of the instruments, and there's so many. And duration of piece, Bobby mentioned this way early in the conversation, but then it's 7 minutes, I got 3 hours, or 15 minutes, I got 3 hours. I need to know, we can do this thing 4 takes, and it needs to be 2.5 minutes on this, and then 2.5 minutes on that. And if you look at my take sheets, they literally will say 1, 108, 116, 124. And if I get ahead, I'm cool. And that's always my goal. And the most stress I have is when and my former TAs, and Bob's witnessed this, and even with composers up there, they get in the weeds, and we might be 40 minutes in, and I've done 8 measures, and we're never going to get through the whole darn piece. So those are some of the things you have to really be thinking about beforehand, so you have a plan, so when you're off the plan, you know how to punt and get yourself back onto the plan.
Yeah, but budgeting time is I think that's probably the biggest mistake I would see, especially with unexperienced musicians recording. You don't think it's going to take as long as it does. So, and it can be for a number of different reasons. It might be that you're unrehearsed or you just haven't practiced enough, but also just it takes time to set up and tear down. We're often spoiled at UMKC where we'll show up to a 4-hour session, and Bob or Joe has been there way before you even know, setting things up, or even the night before, getting things set so that you can go in and just start right when your session starts. And then oftentimes after you're done and you're exhausted, they're around for another couple hours tearing down. But that's not the case in my experience. Like if you're paying a recording studio, whatever the rate is, $100 an hour, the clock starts when they unlock the studio door. And so you might be paying for the first couple hours of setup and tear down. You think, well, this short piece is only going to take me maybe an hour to record. But then you add in setup, tear down, and then sound checking, depending on how meticulous you want to get with sound checking. Prism often will take half a day just to do sound checking to make sure that we're happy with the sound, so that we're not actually recording anything until we're 100% happy with the sound that we're getting. And that has to do with mic choices, mic placement, number of other factors.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we, when we've done large ensemble recordings at the conservatory, we really never are able to spend the time that I would like to get sounds. And I think everybody would like to spend that time. There's just not time. And so we're, a lot of times I am taking my best guess at mic placement and mic selection for different sections of the band. And we get levels real quick at the beginning and we roll, and then we hope we can make it work in the mix. And that's not, I don't prefer to work that way, but I mean, we've made it happen. So it does come together.
Joe?
I think the way Bob operates, at the studio, at the school, we've always had conversations before the concert, and once the year gets going, you kind of know what we want. So I know that if we say we're going to rehearse and do our sound check from 3 to 4:30, you guys are already in there. And basically, I think that's the professional way. I very rarely have come into a studio and things were not already set up, and
Yeah,
played.
you might be paying for that time, but most studios are gonna leave a few hours open between sessions so they can change over and be ready when you walk in the door. Not to immediately start recording, but to start getting
No,
sounds and getting levels and let everybody kind of get settled in. And yeah, I mean, it's just not. Last thing you want is for somebody to run in from the parking lot and have to play right away, or to rush to get to the session and then have to sit around for 45 minutes while we set up. So it just makes a
watch
lot of
that.
sense.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we don't want to see the sausage being made.
Right.
But you want to walk, and then because you're gonna have to. The one step I think that you guys have to understand, students, is that you're gonna have to get a sound. You're not gonna walk in the door and start recording. You're gonna have to spend an hour or more just getting everything level, sound, listening, and before you're actually ready to record the first note.
That's good advice. Yeah, I remember the first session I came into. I didn't realize, wow, we're spending a lot of time just getting ready. Mic placement, group sound. Something you mentioned, Bobby, the sight lines. I remember that one of the session I was in, I couldn't even see the drummer or the bass player, and I'm like, I don't know how we're going to communicate. It was like, this isn't going to work, so we had to redo everything. Bob, really quickly, somebody wants a good setup to record themselves. Just give us like the elevator conversation. I'm going up. I'm like, hey man, I want to record myself. What should I get?
Right now, get a Zoom H4n Pro. It's not the bottom of the line. The built-in mics are decent. It also has 2 external mic inputs, so later you can upgrade to better mics. It works as an audio interface with your computer, so you could use it for Zoom lessons and things like that. And you can take it out in the field and do recordings in any space. So
The Zoom
that's
H4n.
H4n Pro. Yep, it's under $200 now. I think that's the best recorder for the money.
Now I want to shift a little bit from like equipment and setup to a little bit of the concept of an album. So both Zach and Bobby, you have been part of a concept album, and I know Bob, you produce those for faculty soloists and for groups. And so when you're conceiving of a concept for an album or the literature for an album, does is it chicken or egg first? How do you come up with that? Do you have an idea and like, man, and Bobby, you've written so much music. So I want to start with you. When you're conceiving of an album concept, Check Cashing Day, that was a concept. It was delivered differently than albums before that you've had concepts for. Gates Barbecue Suite, that was a concept. How does one work through that? Does the art, are you inspired by the craft and then it becomes an album? Has it ever been reciprocal? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm always writing. I'm always keeping a journal as a composer. I keep sketches, and I've been in the environment and the world I live in is where you have albums with titles: "The Love Supreme," "His Mother Called Him Bill," "Giant Steps," "The Sidewinder," "Maiden Voyage." I mean, you have all these titles. "Seven Steps to Heaven," "Never TT." So, that's kind of like the modus operandi in my field. So, I always I'm always thinking about what's the next one going to be about, and so that's sort of kind of like one of the standard things to do. So I just finished one, so now I'm writing, and I'm trying to see where the the music, what it's saying to me, and also what's going on in the world right now, and how I want to make a statement. What kind of statement do I want to make? I don't. I know already there's going to be a lot of COVID albums coming out. You know, with tunes like Quarantine and you know,
Toilet paper.
rapid test, social distancing. Social distancing. There's going to be a lot of titles like that. I mean, like when we turned into 2020, I think there's going to be a lot of tunes or maybe album titles called 2020 Vision. You see what I mean? So in my field, I'm connected to the political and the social, and also reflecting off of my life, my past. So that's how I kind of pick it up what's around me. I really would be curious to hear what Zach has to say about that.
Well, I mean, a lot of the recordings that I've made with Prism have just been a natural part of just our programming and trying to document that. So we're so rooted in the new music world that we're constantly commissioning and premiering new pieces, and we want to document that for the composer, and just because we, in case we don't get to go back to that repertoire at a point where we're available together to record it, or it's just a really unique collaboration. Like we've been able to work with groups like Parch with the Harry Parch instruments, or like So Percussion with like detuned steel pans, or Pifero, which is a Renaissance band. And so these unique collaborations, like with Parch, it was thousands of dollars just to transport the instruments, and then another several $1,000s to get all the musicians in one place for these concerts. And so it just made sense to document it. But I think some of the same considerations that you might have, especially like older students, grad students, as you're thinking about, well, this is not just like a potpourri degree recital, my junior recital or my senior recital, but like this is something that I might be able to pitch to a presenter, something that would be something you could write a press release about, and somebody who's not really related to like the conservatory would read this and say, oh, this sounds really interesting. This sounds like really a cohesive idea, and be something I'd be interested in going to attend. And those types of considerations, I think, also make a good album. On the other hand, I think gearing this more towards students, that can be a lot of pressure to put on yourself. Like, I need to select all these pieces that go together perfectly, and have all these considerations. And so as a result, you just kind of don't put an album together. And so these days, I think you can just record one piece if you want, or a couple pieces. It doesn't have to be a full-length album. And so my advice for students is just to focus on the music that you're really passionate about right now, and just record it and see where that goes. And you might find that there's another piece that pairs well with that, or you might develop a whole program around it. But you don't want to look back and say, well, I had this piece that I was really passionate about that was playing really well under my fingers, and I didn't record it. I should have recorded it then. I put all this work into it. So I think that can be a good starting point oftentimes.
For us in the wind band world, and orchestra, doesn't matter, but and every large ensemble essentially that I can think of, the reason I choose pieces to record are gifts for the world, meaning there's not a ton of recordings of them, if many, and they become a resource, they become a point of access, they become a point of departure, so we can just let this piece get out there. And the reason it's so important, usually we're collaborating with the composer, and we have been able to spend hours, not minutes, with them, and we know exactly what they want. So the composers are really into it, that they know they're going to get the first statement of this piece is going to be very close to the idea that they had in their head. And like the projects with Jennifer Higdon, she was in residency here for a long time. If you have Chin Yi, she's on our faculty here, and obviously world renowned. And then you look at Roshan Edizade. I've gotten to know Roshan over many, many years. These pieces, and Joe Long, who's the Pulitzer winner, he was on our faculty. You got to know him. And the piece was written for our ensemble. So of course, I don't have to record it, but it would be a ridiculously lost opportunity to not record it. So we do that, and then maybe we can get into this in a second, but where to release these things, how to release these things. So I've given up on the notion of CDs, unless I just want to hand something into somebody, and I'm more into just digital releases, one piece at a time, and let them out. So I don't know if maybe we have a segue into that. Once they're recorded, where do they go from there? So after it's recorded, what then? And Bob, you've seen it all. Bobby, you've seen it all. Zach, and all four of us have probably a little bit different ways the way we release things, or the process through which it gets out to the world. Bob, you want to start with that?
Well, I'm really not often involved in the release part of things. It's kind of not up to me. Again, I'm generally serving more as an engineer than a producer, so I'm not making any financial decisions. I'm not making any timeline decisions or any of that. So I'm probably not the right person to answer that one.
Okay, Bob or Zach? How do you know how to release?
Well,
Bobby, are you signed to a label?
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, right now I'm with Smoke Session,
Right. Okay.
and it's usually label contracts is one with a couple of options. Maybe two record options. So you may put out 3 records with that label, and if the chemistry is good, you can continue the relationship. But on a self-produced label, the things I learned by being with like Blue Note and Columbia and these companies that have a presence here in America is that if you're going to do something yourself, you got like 3 or 4 levels of expenses. And the first one is the musicians. And if you and you're usually recording with your friends, hopefully, unless you're going to bring in a guest artist who's sort of a mercenary, he just a hired gun, so he's got his price. But if you have a contained unit, you can get in there and make some great music, and you got to pay the studio. So most people think that if I can pay for the studio, give the musicians a little taste, and get it all mixed, and then you got to get your artwork. That's another expense, and all this stuff. Then you got this product in your hand. Now what? So that's the next level of expense. Is you're gonna maybe have to have about $2,500 for a radio person, and that radio person will work your record for about 10 weeks. Because that's about the life of a record these days. And what their job is to get airplay and get spins so that you can move up the airplay chart. That's another expense. I always tell people they may have a great product, but you got to have to spend a little bit more money if you want it to get out there, and you're not going to have success on your first one. It usually takes about five releases. If you're going to be self-producing, you got to realize you're going to spend some money, and there's a lot of independent record promoters out there that used to be with major labels that are just freelancing like everybody else now, the gig economy. So there's a lot of folks, you can get them at a decent price, but basically it's around $2,000, $2,500 for 10 weeks to get it up there. Then you're going to need a print man that solicits all the trade magazines, and that's another maybe $1,000 for them to get stuff, because you have to understand that radio stations and magazines, they get a lot of unsolicited material. That word unsolicited, that's a hot word these days, unsolicited. And I won't go there. But people just send stuff to people that they didn't ask for. And so, when you got somebody that has a relationship with these people, whether it's radio people or editors at magazines and critics and reviewers, they will pay attention to that, but it's going to cost you money to jump over the top, over the heap of self-produced records, because there's so many out there. So you're going to have to spend a little money to distinguish yourself. And it depends on what your goal is. If it's just a documentation you want to use and sell at your performances, that's okay too. But it just depends on what you want to do with it, If it's family and friends, and just something to, like Zach said, you're going to add it to your portfolio, and you're building a portfolio of performances as you go along the years. That's great. So it's so many ways to go these days.
And Bobby,
recently,
recently, your energy has shown through Keeping It Real. I believe it was at number 1.
Yeah, it was number 1.
So apparently, Apparently it worked.
Yeah, it worked. They spent that money.
Well, but you must have found the right connection. So that's all. Congratulations on that.
Congratulations, Bobby.
Thank you. Well, I know how it works, and they know. So, you know, I've done it myself. I mean, the Dates Barbecue Suite went to number 4.
So as we're coming to a close, I want to ask you probably a 2-part question, maybe to encapsulate it into your answers. But your favorite part of the recording process and your favorite session in your history of doing so. Now, I mean, that spans a lot of time with all of you, but the favorite part of recording and then maybe your favorite one that stands out to you. So let's go Zach and then Bob and Bobby. Zach?
Well, I'd say my favorite part of recording is being done with it.
Exactly.
We'll all have that same answer.
That's a good answer.
Exactly.
I call it type 2 fun, where like, so type 1 fun is like, you know, eating birthday cake. Like it's fun while you're doing it, or having a drink with friends. Like it's fun while you're doing it. Type 2 fun is fun when you're looking back on it, but it's not always fun in the moment. And sometimes those are some of the most rewarding experiences, actually. So I have a lot of fond memories of recording, and I've kind of blocked out some of the tough sections of those recording sessions. And you just have to realize that it's a lot of work, and you'll get through it. And when you listen back, you're going to be so happy, especially like with some distance. Like you think the session went terribly, and then you listen back, especially in a couple months, you're like, it sounds great. What was I thinking at the moment? As far as my favorite recording sessions, I'm not just saying this, but like the recordings I've done at UMKC have been some of my favorite. Working with Bob has been great. Working with Steve, you want to be in a situation where you're comfortable, and when you surround yourself with the right people, that puts you in a place where you can make great music. So, just thinking about like when we recorded Volume and when we recorded Solace last fall. It was just a great experience being there and like seeing my students on stage, seeing our students on stage, and just being proud of like what they're able to do. That we're able to produce a professional level recording as students is amazing. And then just being around people that you're comfortable with, the conductor, the engineer, the producers. You're in a space that sounds good. You go back and you listen, and you're like, this sounds great. You know, that's a good headspace to be in, rather than sometimes you're in a session and you do the sound check and you go back and listen, and it doesn't sound anything like what you hear coming out of your horn. So
I'm keeping that type 1, type 2 fun. That's awesome. I like that. That's awesome. Bob.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like being done too, but I'll be an engineer for a minute and say that this is weird, but one of my favorite parts of the process is actually editing. You know, I started in this business before we had computers that could do audio, so I learned to cut analog tape with a razor blade, and got pretty good at that. And then computers came along, and it got way easier and way faster. And you know, it's a double-edged sword because we wind up doing a lot of editing now that we wouldn't have done 30 years ago. But I enjoy it, and I'm good at it. It's one of the things that I'm really quick, and you don't hear my edits. If you hear it, it doesn't go out the door. So I take some pride in that.
I can affirm that for sure.
As far as my favorite project, well, my favorite session, it's kind of not in the world that we're kind of talking in right now, but it happened at UMKC, so I'll tell you anyway. About 8 years ago, I guess, when we bought our new recording console for the studio. It's $300,000 piece of equipment, world-class console. The company sent somebody out for a week to work with us on installation and training. And then I had to like break it in somehow and work out the kinks. So I brought in some guys that I had worked with in the studio when I first started in the business. I worked on their album years ago that never got released, and they're all spread out across the country. Matt Kane is the drummer. Bobby, you know Matt. but it was a rock and roll project, and what we did is they all flew in from around the country, and we just put this console through its paces. So we made a rock and roll record, and I don't get to do that very much. It's why I started in this business, and I got away from it because I found the best job in the world. So it was fun to be able to go back and kind of act like a kid again and do that.
That's awesome. I want to hear it.
Yeah, good.
I want to hear it.
It hasn't been released. It was just for fun, but
we want to hear it.
Yeah.
Bobby?
As Zach said, when it's a wrap, the feeling that when you get that last note and you go, okay, fellas, I think we have a record here, and then it's done. And that's also what Zach said, kind of blocked out the hard parts and the difficult parts and the hurdles, and sitting back and listening to what you've done, and then realize that you did accomplish what you set out for, and maybe even more. One of my favorite recordings is when we did the Gates Barbecue Street with all the students. Because they owned that piece, and I was able to rehearse the heck out of them. And they knew that piece better than anybody on the planet. I could have got the greatest musicians in the world, but they wouldn't have played it any better than our students at UMKC. And to this day, when people listen to that, they go, "Is that your school band?" I said, "Yeah, that was one of my best bands I've had at UMKC during my 20 years." I was so proud of that recording. I just handed a copy out to everybody in the band this year to listen to it, to let them know that this is what I'm hearing, and this is what we want to strive for here at the school. So that was a very, very deep, monumental recording for me with that group of musicians.
I want to add. I don't know how many recordings I've done now, a fair amount, and it's interesting. Now I'm 52, and some of the recordings that I've done are 25 years ago, and one of the greatest joys that I have here I've had recently, is going back and listening to some of these recordings, and this is going to sound strange. It's not the recordings. It's seeing Tim McAllister play soprano in my brain. It's seeing Zach play alto. It's seeing Jennifer playing principal trumpet on this piece in my brain when I'm listening to it, and just being so proud of the students that did it. And these in a certain way, they'll live beyond us, right? And it's a permanent document, and I think that's so. It's nostalgic for me every time I listen to one of our old recordings, and it's very heartwarming too. So, and it makes me just such positive memories.
I was going to say, since I've been retired, I have all these recordings from all the concerts that the bands have done over the years, and they're on my iTunes. And so when I'm on shuffle, it's really fun. And if we're doing like somebody else's music, like Oliver Nelson or Duke Ellington or Jimmy Heath or whatever, the recording will come on, and I won't even realize that it's actually UMKC.
Yep.
It sounds like, I'm like, who is that? Oh my God, that's us.
Yeah.
Back in 2006 or 2002.
Yeah.
I want all you students out there listening to know, man, that we have a high level, world-class level here at the conservatory here. What's going on? So don't let your location stunt your enthusiasm and your drive. You don't have to be in New York or LA or something like this. Kansas City, great things happen here. Great things, world-class things happen here.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Joe, you want to answer that one?
No, I'm sitting here in awe of looking at you all, people that I consider friends and people that I've worked with as, recording in projects, performing together. And it's just really inspiring to know that we get to do this together and where we get to do it. And I echo the sentiment that Bobby said, that, you know, we're in the heart of America with a Super Bowl champion and many more to come. And all I can tell you is that I believe that we do have the best jobs in the world, and that the fact that, where Bobby said, you know, we've documented our histories and our lives in these careers, and they'll come up on our recordings, and I'm like you, Bobby. I'm like, who is that? And then you realize that's our students, and you know, they have gone on to produce their own recordings. I just saw Herman Mahari just released a video of one of his projects, and Bob sat in a studio doing that. Michael Schultz is recording. I've seen that happen, right? And they're all products of the people that have been in these seats that we get to work with. So I want to say thank you for all of you. You've given our students things. I mean, we obviously can't hit it all, but the advice you've given them is so worthy. And I just am blessed to have great colleagues like you. So that's all I wanted to say.
We're recording this on a Saturday, so I hope my friends here have a great rest of your day. We're very thankful. We're thankful if you shared in this session with us. Know that we value you here in Kansas City. For those of you that are watching this and you're not in Kansas City, I'm sorry we had more talk specifically about Kansas City, but all 5 of us actually work here in Kansas City, so there's a lot more connections to this amazing city that we live in. However, you're not going to get any of the 5 of us to say we're not remarkably proud of this school and this city as well. So that's also good. And everybody, if you're watching this in the morning, have a great day. If you're watching in the night, have a great night, sleep well. And we're very thankful. And come back next week for the next one. We're very thankful. Say bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.